This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Well, I've got good news to start. Nobody did any 30-foot leaps off of ladders to try and actively end their lives on Dynamite this week. So that's good, I guess. The bad news is the show still sucked by the end. But that's not particularly a groundbreaking announcement if you have two brain cells to rub together and you actually know what good wrestling shows are supposed to be. Of course, we will momentarily get into that colossal calamity of collective caca. I was trying to think of another C word to fill out the alliteration, but I failed. What is not a failure is my introductory material each week. Here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, on YouTube and Rumble each Monday and Friday to bring you the whole gamut of wrestling talk from the modern-day junky crap they call pro wrestling to the classic retro content that actually is pro wrestling. Back when guys actually knew how to draw money and sell tickets without pointlessly killing themselves. And of course, we do have the retro shows at hand today, but if you want to stick around with the FSWR podcast each week, make sure to smash the subscribe button, like the show, and leave a comment down below to share your thoughts on the material we talk about today. I'm sure I've got nothing but sunshine, peaches, and rainbows awaiting me on the other side with the AEW fans out there that are still trying to sit there and propagate how great Dynamite is. It's the same people that used to praise how great Impact was back in the day, even though we all knew the show sucked. Yeah, at least back then we could all get a good laugh out of it. Whereas if you try to even scoff at something AEW does in front of a diehard fan, you get the bullhorns. Ain't no criticizing AEW's product. No. Because if anything's been proven, that show is nothing but 2 hours of absolute wrestling perfection with no logic gaffes or anything to complain about. So, we'll see about that one as I start tearing into this one. And we open this edition of Dynamite with the men's wild card match of the Owen Hart brackets with absolutely zero build to it, just diving right in. It's Samoa Joe versus Johnny Nitro / Johnny Impact / John Morrison / Johnny whatever last name he decides to take up depending on the territory. Now going by Johnny Elite. And also, because fans are complete marks anymore, they give Johnny the huge initial pop when he first shows up coming through the entrance tunnel, and then literally within seconds of this match starting, the fans are chanting, "Joe is going to kill you." So, thanks for coming, Johnny. Your 6 seconds of fame came and went. And that's not to discredit Johnny or his talent. Dude's a hell of an athlete. He's in great shape. You know, I always thought WWE could have done a lot more with him, but you could also say that about a lot of guys that came and went in that system. Some of the best stuff I ever saw from Johnny was the work he did with Joey Mercury and Melina back in the day when they were doing the M&M thing. Granted, that was also around a time where I was only sparingly watching the product, so if you asked me to recount anything they did from that period, you'd get nothing but white noise from me. I remember their entrance was sick. Wouldn't say I was the biggest John Morrison fan in the world, but he's always been a strong worker. Unfortunately, that's about as high of a praise as I can give the entire match. I don't know what the plan is for Johnny Elite in AEW, if he's actually signed to a contract or if this is like a one and done appearance. Either way, this is a horrible way to showcase Johnny. I shouldn't say horrible because that's not entirely accurate, but I wouldn't say it was entirely constructive either. We got to see a couple of the big flashy things that he's well known for in his matches, but the layout of this match just did not make any sense to me. From the opening bell, Joe was essentially in control of the offense immediately. So if the goal was to show the people what John Morrison was capable of, they didn't do a great job showcasing that from the start. Morrison did a cool-looking corkscrew to Joe on the outside, if you discount the problem that he completely missed him and sprang back up to his feet after basically landing on his hip and ass. He also tried a 450 splash at one point, but Joe was way out of position for it, so when he came down, he basically had to land on his feet and then sort of fall forward to complete the move. Did not look good at all. And believe me, this was not the only botched move that we would see on the show. And that pretty much immediately segued into Joe kicking out and setting up Morrison for the Muscle Buster. Boom, clean pin, 1, 2, 3, thanks for coming, Johnny. And within milliseconds of that, outrun Jay Lethal, Sanjay Dutt, and slightly more mobile Great Khali to do the heat beatdown. Because, of course, with AEW, there's always got to be a goddamn afterbirth deal. Can't ever leave well enough alone on this show. Nope, gotta cram in 1,500 bodies onto a given program somehow. And that, of course, led to the best friends coming out for the save, minus Orange Cassidy, and whatever in the hell that get-up Chuck Taylor was wearing. Looked like he just got out of the discount section at Kohl's. So, yeah, that was kind of an opening bust. That's usually where AEW hits home the strongest, is their opening material. And everything else that comes after it is usually a downslide effect. This week, they started off pretty mid, and, well, the show still fell off a cliff by the end, but it wasn't quite the steady decline from the top of the program like we're used to seeing. Following that, we had the deal in the back with the Hardys and the Beta Bucks, where I guess now they're deciding to try and hype this feud up as a big deal, even though we're about 5 weeks past the expiration date on the Hardys reunion in AEW, because they royally botched that one up. So now they are going to try and force feed this program onto us at Double or Nothing, like anyone could possibly care now. Discount the AEW marks. At least Matt and Jeff cut a good promo on them and told them to cut out the good Christian AF BS and call them Hardys cosplayers, because, I mean, let's be frank, that's exactly what those two numbnuts are. I still won't give a fuck about the match at the pay-per-view because I'm already over Matt and Jeff. After Tony spent weeks wasting them in lousy undercard programs with Andrade and a bunch of job guys. So as the desperate ploy to keep up viewership continues, we follow the opening bout with CM Punk coming out. He was also sporting an "Abortion Rights Are Human Rights" t-shirt. So clearly CM Punk has no fucking clue what the Roe versus Wade case actually is. And this also seems to be Tony Khan's newest booking trope that he likes to pull out of his back pocket each week. You have two guys feuding, so let's have one of the wrestlers go out to do color commentary for his opponent's match. At least in the case of Punk, he adds a little bit of value to commentary because he can actually talk, whereas most of the time the wrestlers doing commentary are completely futile in every way. See Hangman Page last week where he was just sitting there picking his fingernails during the Punk match. So anyway, it's Konosuke Takeshita versus Hangman Adam Page. And because these two have such a storied history together, a blood feud, if you will, they immediately come blazing out of the gates with stiff forearm exchanges. And they're going about 1,000,000 miles an hour from the opening bell. They start breaking out all the WrestleMania big moves and false finishes for Christ knows what reason, considering this wasn't even the main event of the program. It's in fucking Seg 3 or whatever. There's basically no rhyme or reason to anything that's happening. Neither guy is even bothering to sell anything. They're just doing shit left and right. I still have no idea whether or not Hangman Page is supposed to be a face or a heel, but I mean, at this stage in the game, I don't even know if it's worth harping on. Once they started dropping each other on their heads and necks with all the Germans, and, you know, they both immediately no-sold it so they could spring up and do more shit, I just kind of tuned out of this one entirely. All I remember is the ridiculous finish where Takeshita gave Page that clothesline off the top rope to the mat, and he did the same thing with that Jay Lethal match. I still thought it was stupid, but this was even stupider because at least when Takeshita did the spot with Lethal, he at least bothered to sell it. Page took a flip bump off the top rope, kind of sort of landed on his feet, although he really didn't, and then he immediately popped up to hit Takeshita with a discus lariat, then followed it up with a buckshot lariat, and I guess because they needed to pack in more pointless stuff in this match, Page hit Takeshita with the GTS and pinned him. So there you go. I'm more so still trying to figure out why it's taking Adam Page almost 15 full minutes to beat a guy that literally just showed up on the show less than 3 weeks ago. The only thing missing from this was Page literally pulling out a goddamn revolver from under the ring and just shooting Takeshita point blank in the head. Because the story I was being sold here was that was the only conceivable way that Hangman Page was going to win this fucking match. I mean, he practically threw the entire kitchen sink at him and then some. And no offense to Takeshita. Dude's a fine athlete. He's in great ring shape. But in the ideal world where things are supposed to make sense and everyone wasn't booked to be on a similar playing field on the card regardless of skill or ability, there's absolutely no reason at this time why Hangman Page should be competitive with a random guy from a minor league Japanese promotion. You want to spend 6 months building up the guy and giving him some signature wins on TV and pay-per-view, then I have no problem watching Takeshita have a competitive TV match with Adam Page. But when he's only been on the show for a cup of coffee and he's already getting near falls on your world fucking champion, allegedly the top guy of your company, even though everyone with half a brain knows by now that Page is nowhere near the top guy in the company, not even in the top 10. No, I'm sorry. I don't buy it. I mean, based on the way they booked this thing, they pretty much inadvertently made a valid case that Takeshita earned himself the right to challenge Page for the belt at Double or Nothing with Punk. Which, I mean, if we're being honest about it, at least it might add a little bit of intrigue to the current program they've got going on. And I love CM Punk. I want to like Hangman Page. I have nothing against the guy. He's got the potential to be a star, maybe someday, but yeah, so far this program isn't doing it for me. I'm just not buying this world title program as a main event level feud. The character psychology is all out of whack. I have no idea what they're going for with Page's new demeanor. And above all else, I still don't like the fact that they're practically going from 0 to 100 with trying to make this a personal issue between the two. It makes absolutely no sense in the context of the way both wrestlers have been acting on the show. Like, 1 week, Hangman Page shows up on Dynamite to cut a scathing, almost semi-heel promo on Punk, and then the next week, Punk's coming out in an Islander sports jersey and he's being a dick to the Long Island crowd. I don't know, I guess because they're trying to go for some kind of goofy Bret Shawn US versus Canada dynamic. Now they got Page stealing Punk's finishing move and almost kind of putting him over like a petulant little bitch. You know, he's doing the face-offs with Punk and he's flipping him the bird. He's disrespectfully stomping past him on the rampway. And, you know, all the while I keep asking, where is this all coming from? Why is Adam Page all of a sudden a douchebag that doesn't like CM Punk when we've been given no context or backstory as to what led to all this? Doesn't make a lick of sense. And, I mean, with only 2 weeks from the actual pay-per-view, I'd like to see if they even bother explaining what Page's deal is with Punk. Because so far, I'm out to lunch on the whole thing. Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland did a squash against two job guys, and I wrote nothing down about it. What wasted potential with Keith Lee. Boy, did they drop the ball on that guy in a hurry. Am I surprised by it? No, not in the slightest, but God almighty, is it pathetic to watch. And just when you figure, what else could they possibly do to present Keith Lee as just another guy on this show? Well, they eventually send out Powerhouse Hobbs, Ricky Starks, and the Jurassic Express to set up a three-way tag title match at the pay-per-view, which, quite frankly, we all saw coming, and I don't think any of us really want to see that match. And that's not to diss the guys involved, per se. You know, I'm a big fan of Hobbs and Starks. Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus are fine, although their title reign has plummeted in value recently. And Strickland and Keith are good workers, but I don't like multi-man matches. I've been over that 1,000 times. And as much as I'd like to believe that they're going to have Hobbs and Starks actually win the tag belts, I just don't see it happening. You know, they could always have Christian turn on Jungle Boy, which they've kind of been teasing on the show for a while now, but I don't know. This just feels like such a waste for a lot of the guys involved here. Keith should have been a much bigger player than he is by now. Hobbs is a guy I've been waiting for them to shit or get off the pot with forever, and the Jurassic Express title reign just hasn't clicked. You know, kind of similar to how Hangman Page's title reign hasn't clicked, yet for some reason, in the back of my mind, I can see Tony Khan keeping the belts on them, even though we've showed by now that it's clearly not working. But up next was God's Gift to Wrestling. One of the only true redeeming qualities about anything in the wrestling business these days. MJF, baby. And of course, Wardlow should also receive acclaim too, because he's been just as big a part of the best material on AEW as MJF has. And this week, it's the 10 Lashes segment, where Wardlow must survive 10 belt whips from MJF in order to get the match with him at Double or Nothing. So, of course, they give MJF the floor to do the Heat promo with the Houston crowd, and it's awesome, as usual. He can barely even get out the word Houston without gagging in his mouth. And, you know, they gave Wardlow a sort of spin-off with the whole Goldberg entrance by having him escorted all the way from the back with the security through the hallways. Of course, he's still in handcuffs. And, you know, I remember when they did this segment with Cody Rhodes a couple years ago. And, I mean, if I'm being honest about it, it's probably the last good thing I remember Cody being involved with in AEW outside the Dustin match. You know, they really spent a long time milking that segment and trying to establish the drama of the story. This was done entirely different, but I almost kind of like this better. Like, it made all the sense in the world with how it was laid out. Wardlow's a beefy, jacked up dude. He's built like a brick house. He should have a high threshold for pain. So MJF takes off the belt and he whips Wardlow once. Nothing. And he whips him again. And nothing. Wardlow's standing there with his back turned. He's smiling, not even flinching, not even blinking. And by now we're on like the third whip. And MJF has had it with all Wardlow and his shenanigans. So he starts going ape on Wardlow with lash after lash after lash after lash. And Wardlow, the fucking machine, is just standing there taking it. God, MJF's fantastic here. He's practically having an epileptic seizure. He's so pissed off. Because he knows that this plan is backfiring on him here. Meanwhile, Wardlow's laughing in his face the entire time. And he lets Shawn Spears get in a couple shots, but Wardlow's still not wincing. And finally, they get to the 10th and final whip. And because MJF's a dirtbag, he gives Wardlow the groin shot, drops him on the mat, and he'll start doing the gang beating and laying into him. And this is so phenomenal because not only is Wardlow not allowed to fight back because of his contractual steps to MJF, but, I mean, the dude's handcuffed. There's no way he's able to defend himself. So this all makes logical, rational sense. And by the end, MJF decks Wardlow with the diamond ring, and they pose over him with hyping up the cage showdown next week with Shawn Spears. we'll see how that round goes, but if the trend continues like it has for the last several weeks now, it'll probably turn out to be the best part of the show, because Lord knows anything else comes close to touching what these guys are doing right now. And I even said to myself the minute this segment was over, this is real professional wrestling, man. It's honest to God, logical, story-driven pro wrestling with reason and meaning behind it. If AEW Dynamite was 2 straight hours of this kind of wrestling every week, it would be the best show, hands down. No question. Problem is, this is purely a single 15-minute segment of greatness, and it's surrounded by another hour plus of bullshit and hodgepodge booking. By the way, I think this is the point in the show where Roppongi Vice threw out the challenge to FTR for the ROH tag titles, which then brought me to the realization that FTR were not even on the show this week. A poor decision. And then we had Kyle O'Reilly versus Ray Phoenix in the Owen Hart tournament. That we did. It is gymnastic lucha stunt show routines versus technically sound ground-based amateur style. So go ahead and hedge your bets as to how this ended up turning out. Here's basically the entirety of what I wrote down about this match. Kyle O'Reilly is one of the most underrated workers in the business today, and Ray Phoenix gonna Ray Phoenix. O'Reilly's working over Ray's arm, going after and targeting his leg with holds and submissions, and then moments later, Phoenix is right back up doing springboards off the ropes and spin kicks and all this complex-looking offense that no one would ever be able to actually execute if this were real and he was having a body limb worked over like that. I will say this, and I know this is kind of O'Reilly's thing in his matches. I never liked it when he did this in WWE either, but that thing he does where someone will hit him with a punch or kick and he'll go sailing into the ropes, but he'll kind of catch himself and then deflect back off to hit the guy with a clothesline. It looks way too hokey, and he did it several times in this match where it just got to be ridiculous. It's not even like you could buy it as O'Reilly just bouncing off the ropes and firing back. He's legitimately reaching out and grabbing the ropes with his hands and then using it as leverage to pull himself back up so he can hit the guy with a move. If I were Tony Khan or if I were running a company of my own and O'Reilly was working for me, I'd be telling him to cut that shit out because it just looks dumb. The finish of this match legitimately had me laughing, and it's because it's so ridiculously AEW in every way. Get this finish. Phoenix gives O'Reilly the rope walk Hurricane Rana off of the apron to the outside floor. Both guys sold it like they were dead as soon as they hit the ground. And then within seconds of this, Phoenix picks O'Reilly back up, throws him into the ring. He goes for a springboard off the ropes, and O'Reilly immediately no-sells the Rana onto the floor, traps Phoenix in a cross armbar / leg lock combo, and taps him out clean. It was so preposterous in everything that is wrong with modern wrestling, I just cracked. Years ago, I probably would have been motherfucking this and ranting about how stupid it is, but at this stage in my life, I see so much dumb crap on AEW every week, I'm just numb to it at this point. You know, it's obvious where they're going with this whole tournament. They're evidently setting up Cole and O'Reilly in the finals at Double or Nothing. Because if there's one match that we desperately need to see in AEW in 2022, it is the 539th installment of Adam Cole versus Kyle O'Reilly. I didn't dig the program when they did it last spring in NXT, and whether it takes place there or here in AEW, my thoughts still remain the same. Seen it, been there, done that, I'm ready to move on. We had the Jericho Appreciation Society, Blackpool Fight Club, Kingston, Santana, and Ortiz faction warfare segment thing. And I don't know if Jericho was catching up on the never-ending Raw promo segments that we used to get from back in the good old days, but if that's where he got his inspiration for coming up with the material for this one, then it showed. Jericho's out there on the stage talking to the babyfaces in the ring. He's running down his history with William Regal, which takes about a month, calling him a class or a world-class addict instead of a world-class champion. He's single-handedly pointing out all the faces and trying to run them all down. Says Danielson's the guy that's never taken a drink or drug in his life, but if he doesn't watch himself, given the crew he's hanging around with, he might find himself in the same rehab center as Jon Moxley. And they're standing there trying to cause dissension with the babyface team by bringing up how Danielson called Kingston lazy and how Kingston called Danielson a prick. They're trying to do some low-level comedy where they're teasing that they all want to do one of those football fuckery matches at the pay-per-view, but that gets shut down because that doesn't work for Mox, brother. And yeah, what a fucking rib that was, right? The guy whose entire gimmick is doing bad outlaw matches, even he's refusing to partake in that stupid stadium stampede garbage. And this shit went on and on and on and on. All to set up another multi-man, anything goes. Everybody do whatever the hell you want because we're a bunch of lazy bookers and we can't go 2 fucking weeks without doing some kind of street fight match. Dude, even Eddie Kingston was all fed up with this bullshit by the end. He's like, dude, stop talking. Just get in the ring and fight. Of course, they all walked away. And then for absolutely no reason at all, Danielson and Kingston get into a shoving match after trying to hold him back from chasing after the heels. Oh my God. This segment never ended. And keep in mind, I still glossed over a handful of things that actually happened here. For the love of all things bright and beautiful, don't ever let Daniel Garcia come within an arm's length of a microphone ever again. Please. That dude makes Billy Kidman look like an all-time great promo. Yeah, so this whole segment was cock. Oh yeah, and we were talking about it earlier. Speaking of wasted potential, Bryan Danielson. End of sentence. And if they didn't already run off half the remaining viewers with that previous never-ending talk segment, now they surely ran off the rest of them with this Britt Baker versus Makito match. Holy shit. You know, I was thinking about it watching this match. This was so offensive. I almost had the urge to take back every bad thing I've ever said about Riho. They almost got me to feel sorry for the little ballerina. Man. I'll tell you what. There have been a lot of shitty outlaw people that AEW's brought in to work matches in their 3-year existence. Joey Janela, Marco Stunt, Peter Avalon, Nakazawa, Nick Gage, Big Swole, Abaddon, that Yuka Saka Kaka Kuka Kiki. Oh, and of course, can't forget Orange Cassidy too. That Nimrod doesn't get let off the list. I think this Makito chick might have topped them all. I was not watching AEW all that closely around March of last year, so whatever in the fuck she was doing with Brit around that point, I have no recollection of, but Jesus Christ, did I dodge a bullet not having to watch that. And by the way, Makito is pretty much a cut and dry definition of everything I've ever said about Riho, the difference being that she makes Riho look tolerable by comparison. I'm not even going to get into it, but everything about this segment was everything I hate about AEW all wrapped up into about 10 minutes. It was the exact kind of turn the channel heat that I used to get watching the show back when they first started. And, I'd have to see multiple people on the show that had no business being on a national cable television with doing hokey shticks and goofy comedy, and none of it was entertaining or funny in the slightest. I will take an Orange Cassidy skit over ever having to see Makito on my screen ever again. Cassidy's shtick is stupid as all get out, but at least it's actually kind of over with the people. I had to walk away during this match. I was so beside myself. This right here, I want to throw this in there for the record. This is the exact kind of thing you play when people ask, why did AEW fail? 10 to 15 years from now, whenever people are wondering, I wonder what it was that caused AEW to fail as a company. I present to you all Britt Baker versus Makito from AEW Dynamite on May 18th, 2022. In addition to all the other Bush League indie garbage that had no business being on national cable television. So I guess they were trying to do everything in their power to prolong the main event. Probably because one of the guys involved in the main event was barely mobile to begin with. So they did this very awkward in-ring segment with Tony Schiavone, Serena Deeb, and Dustin Rhodes. And that's probably the kindest way I can put the whole thing. Awkward. It begins with Schiavone trying to hype up next week's 3-year anniversary show for AEW. And because it's Tony talking, he's evidently going to get cut off by someone. And lo and behold, a shocker to absolutely no one that watches this show in a given week, out comes Serena Deeb to interrupt him. And she essentially accuses Schiavone of doubting Deeb's ability to beat Thunder Rosa for the women's belt at the pay-per-view, after a comment he apparently made last week, of which I had no memory of. And then she calls out Dustin for pretty much the same thing. So Dustin comes out so Deeb can admonish him while he just stands there and takes it. And listen, you've all heard me put Serena over. She's the best female worker in the business today, and it's not even close. All around, she's on a class well above every other female in the business today, including Thunder Rosa, who I've also put over countless times, and I'm a big fan of as well. But this just didn't work. Deeb was stumbling over herself. It sounded very rehearsed. And even though she had good material she was trying to work with here, man, did the execution fall flat. Flatter than a plate full of piss, to coin a great phrase. And Deeb's never been Roddy Piper on the stick to begin with, but this segment did not belong on television. I understand they're trying to hype the title feud because it's already having little buzz to begin with, but if their end game was to try and soak in more viewers and attention for that program, it didn't work by the end of this. They needed to cut this from the show entirely. And with a little under 15 minutes left of airtime, we got Jeff Hardy and Adam Cole in the Owen Hart tournament. Again, maybe a strategic booking plan on their part to keep Jeff's match as short as possible, considering his recent showings, but saying this whole thing was rushed all to hell would kind of be putting it mildly. They immediately have Cole jumpstart on the aisleway. He throws Jeff into the steps. They're pretty much immediately to commercial after that. They come back from break. They do some stuff for a few minutes. I have no idea what in the fuck on God's green earth they were trying to attempt here, but Jeff Hardy goes for a whisper in the wind off the ropes, and Cole, I think, was supposed to catch him with a super kick. Well, he didn't. In fact, he missed Jeff so plainly in view of the hard cam. If this doesn't make the cover for the next Botchamania, I'd be shocked. And bam, bam, Jeff fires back with the reverse twist of fate, followed up with a missed swanton attempt. And then Cole immediately comes back to his feet and hits him with a boom and pins him. So yes, they beat Jeff Hardy clean on free TV in a 10-minute main event rushed TV match. Of course, I think that's the least of our problems now. And as we noted earlier on the show, because every segment in AEW must end with mass pandemonium and chaos, we have the Afterbirth. Da-da-da-da. So outrun the Beta Bucks to tease the super kick to Matt and Jeff. Of course, Cole blindsides both of them and drops him with a clothesline from behind. Visually, it looked ridiculous, but I'm not going to get into that now, because that would involve me taking the time to talk about Cole's limp dick physique, and that would be a topic for another date. And eventually outrun Darby Allin and Sting to make the save, and by that, I mean Darby was sprinting, Sting was strolling. And they eventually get thwarted by Fish and O'Reilly. Somewhere in there, they did an angle where they stomped Sting's leg into a folding chair. Of course, I expect him to be back on television in 2 weeks anyway, so I kind of glazed over that whole deal. And pretty much from there, it was an immediate fade to black because they were completely out of time. Looking back, something tells me that Jericho segment was probably not supposed to go as long as it did. Because pretty much everything that happened from that point onward was rushed. Probably could have made room for the main event by taking out the Serena Deeb segment, but that would also imply that Tony Khan knows what he's doing and knows how to competently put together a professional wrestling program. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, another bad show. Excluding MJF and Wardlow, of course, because they prove to be the only redeeming qualities about this 2-hour train wreck every week. CM Punk's usually good too, but the stuff he's been doing with Paige has been very hit and miss lately. I think it's pretty obvious now that the Danielson horse has left the barn. That guy is a true story of falling from grace when he used to be the best part of the show every single week. Having great matches with guys and being the best heel on the entire show. 2 match of the year candidates with Hangman Page for the world title, and now he's doing whatever he's doing with this Blackpool Fight Club stuff, and he's a complete background player. But hey, at least the pay-per-view's only a couple weeks out. You all excited yet? Because I'm still kind of waiting. So what do y'all think? Ready to move on to the classic content for the week? Think I'm ready. NWA World Championship Wrestling, May 17th, 1986. And of course, we begin, as always, with video clip highlights from previously seen angles. This time, it is gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Wahoo McDaniel getting into a post-match brawl after a tag match. And the only thing we saw in this initial footage was the two doing some punch and chop exchanges, but there was more to come with that later in the program. Believe me when I tell you, it escalated beyond simple punches and chops. Then cutting to the booth, we are pretty much immediately interrupted with Jim Cornette coming out to rant and rave. Not before checking his face and adjusting his tie into the camera frame while completely blocking Tony Schiavone, who was trying to hype up the 87 Crockett Cup location announcement. So Corny brings out a workout videotape specifically for Baby Doll, which I believe he referred to as the Mama Cast Elliott workout tape. Because, she's fat. And by the way, yes, for those of you watching at home, Corny did in fact have an actual VHS tape with him. Like the large cassettes that you'd actually have to stick into a VCR in order to play them. Devices that are not even constructed on televisions anymore. That is how out of date they are. It's almost as outdated as seeing the old car models from back in like the 90s and early 2000s where they would have disk drives and cassette players built into the actual car. Actually, I still remember I had an old 2006 Dodge minivan that had a cassette drive built into the front. That is how old I am. So anyway, he also gets into a spiel about the James boys, who, keep in mind, last week on the show, we had seen footage of these masked hooligans wrapping a giant rope around Cornette's neck, dragging him out into the parking lot, and attempting to wrap the rope around the back of a pickup truck hitch to presumably commit homicide on live television. So suffice it to say, Cornette was not too happy about this incident. And then he vowed that the Midnights were going to expose these men as Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes, and that they would have them suspended for their actions. And as Corny wraps up and walks off, David Crockett, standing there with the biggest smirk on his face, turns to Tony and goes, "I think he's finished. Anyway, let's go to the ring for a great match." And then we cut to the ring for our supposed great match. It was Magnum TA versus Art Pritz. And I started laughing immediately because I knew exactly what it was going to be. So the fact that I could not only call this match on the fly before it ever happened, it made David's statement that much funnier. This great match consisted of Magnum hitting Art with a belly-to-belly in key minus 10 seconds and then pinning him 1, 2, 3. That's pretty great, I'll admit. We were not even 5 minutes into the show, and I was already rolling on the floor in tears. See, this is how great professional wrestling used to be back in the day. And then we cut to the booth for a Rock and Roll Express promo. And last week, if you recall, they had sent Robert Gibson out to do a solo promo within the first 10 minutes of the show. And that went over like a fart in church, to put it rather bluntly. Here, they at least had Ricky Morton out with him to take over and save it. I have absolutely no idea what Gibson said in this promo, aside from something about Ric Flair running his nose about a lot of things. I presume he meant mouth, but who knows, maybe Flair had a cold. And then Ricky mocked Flair for always making fun of the rock and roll female fans being teeny boppers in training underwear, to which he then proceeds to pull out a giant red thong, stating that Flair always likes to boast about liking the big girls, but the ones sporting these size thongs are just a little ridiculous. And, we talk about fat shaming and body positivity and all that hot garbage today. It's one of the big circulating political topics that people like to focus on. For God knows what reason, I have no idea. Most department stores now have like triple XL sizes for both sexes, men and women. Well, to be honest, it's sad. I'd make a joke about it, but the truth of the matter is, when you really analyze it, the promotion of body positivity is probably one of the most collectively damaging things our society is inflicting on itself in 2022. In 1986, seeing Ricky Morton pull out a thong this huge could easily be played for laughs because, hypothetically, yes, it is funny to think that there are women out there that are actually that big, but in 2022... let's just say it's not out of the ordinary that a large woman would be able to fit into a thong that large. And instead of being able to laugh about it, we'd be shamed and admonished for doing so. Different times, different culture, but damn, it's really sad to see what we've done to modern society. And then coming back from the break, we had a Ragin' Bull promo. And I'll be 100% honest, pretty much everything Manny Fernandez said up until the point that Jimmy Valiant showed up was in Spanish, so I didn't write anything down. But when Valiant showed up, boy did this thing turn around in a hurry. Valiant was in full color for this one. Manny's talking at the camera, trying to wrap up his thoughts. And meanwhile, there's Valiant with his back turned to the camera, looking at Tony, and I don't know what the fuck he was doing here, but it involved gesticulating and booty shaking that literally had Tony on the verge of cracking. And then Valiant turned around and vowed that all members of the Paul Jones army were going to be bald-headed geeks as he pulled out an electric razor, including T-Joes Khan, plural. And he did not mention Baron von Raschke at all in this promo, so I take it Valiant put 2 and 2 together on that one. Ron Garvin wrestled Robert Burrows. And yes, Burrows is another new job talent on this show. He sucked. I was also not convinced that the man wasn't wrestling in straight denim jeans until they actually zoomed in the camera, and I could tell that he was just wearing light wash tights. This match had a lot of stretching and a lot of, well, nothing. Although watching Burrows take bumps was kind of amusing, it was first week at wrestling school bad, and of course Ronnie won with the knockout punch, so the story is now evolving that the hand is on a slow recovery, which will surely leave the Horsemen none too happy, as we find out later in the program. After that, we had another Jimmy Cornette promo, which really didn't have a whole lot of noteworthy material. It was basically just a retread of what he said earlier about the James Gang before he introduced the Midnight Express for their match. And no commercial break, just a straight lead-in. The match was the Midnight Express versus Rocky Kernodle and Vernon Deaton. The highlight of the entire thing being the back-and-forth banter between Cornette and David Crockett, who I think might be the best pairing of impromptu, off-the-cuff arguing we have ever seen in the business. There's a point in this match where they're spending like 2 minutes going back and forth over the identity of the James boys, and Cornette tells Crockett to look him in the eye and tell him that they're not Magnum and Dusty in disguise. And Crockett, refusing to play into Cornette's games, just goes, "I'm looking you in the eye." We also had Corny dropping the misogyny line in here about women's best attribute being barefoot in the kitchen cooking and cleaning, to which Crockett promptly asked Jim, "Is that what you say about your mother?" To which Jim goes, "My mom is not a normal woman, and you can tell by the way she raised me." And Crockett immediately responds, "You better believe it." God, I love this show. Fucking love this show, man. God, I wish David were doing color commentary in AEW every week instead of the idiots they have on the booth right now. And yes, that also includes Tony Schiavone, who, as I continue to note, week after week adds nothing of value to that show at all. At least with David, I could expect some classic lines here and there, even though about 80% of the time, guaranteed he'd have no idea what the fuck's going on in that television program. At least I know he'd make a concerted effort to put over the baby faces, because holy cow, was that man super pro babyface. He made sure to let everyone know that he was on the good guy's side. Let's just put it that way. We had J.J. Dillon and Tully Blanchard at the booth for a promo. And J.J.'s taking a minute to basically run down all the baby faces and point out the fact that the bad guys are all the ones with the hardware in the locker room. There's an insider term that you don't hear many people use to describe belts anymore. Then he talks about Ronnie Garvin's wrist recovering. Says that he apparently wants some kind of tape fist match with Tully to even the playing field, because he knows deep down that without the tape fists, Ronnie doesn't stand a chance in a one-on-one situation with Tully. Then Tully basically made his case that he's the ultimate wrestling machine in the NWA, and that whenever the babyfaces step foot in the ring with him, Tully will outwork them all. So indeed, Tully's gimmick in 1986 is Christian Cage's current gimmick in 2022, except, Tully actually wrestles more than twice a year. Raging Bull and Jimmy Valiant wrestled Brody Chase and another new job guy, Jerry Garman. I wrote nothing down about the match except for the chants of bald-headed geeks, which sounded particularly funny from a group of younglings in the crowd who started the chant. And the other thing I wrote down involved Paul Jones, because very early on in the match, David and Tony tell us that Paul Jones has come out to scout the match. And I guess at the time I figured they just meant he was watching from the interview booth or something, and that they were going to put the camera on him to show a shot of him standing at the booth watching. So about a minute or two passes, they're doing spots in the ring, and I'm like wondering to myself, okay, where is Paul Jones? They said he was out there watching, and I don't see him. And it wasn't until the closing 20 seconds of the match where they finally cut to a random camera shot of what appeared to look like something resembling a human figure standing in the shadows. I have to presume this was Paul Jones, but how in the world Tony and David picked this guy out amongst the crowd in this lighting, I have no idea. We had a quick Arn Anderson promo. Actually, before Arn, David and Tony were running down a bunch of details about the 86th Great American Bash Tour, including the various towns and venues they were going to be visiting. They also name-dropped a bunch of musicians that were going to be performing at said locations. And the only thing I really gathered out of Arn's promo was him promising the return of Ole, without specifically mentioning the name Ole. He just said the Fourth Horseman will be returning. Road Warriors versus Ray Traylor and Carl Stiles. And either I've been mistyping Stiles' last name with a Y, or they had a typo on the graphic this week. I thought they just spelled it like AJ spells it, but here they spelled it Stiles, which looked very strange on screen. Anyway, Hawk and Animal won in about the time it took for me to realize the different spelling of Stiles, and by that point they were already airing another Peacock commercial, so I spent way too much time focusing on that. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus Rocky King was next, and once again there wasn't a whole lot to it. Garvin won with a brainbuster in about a minute. He was sporting long pink tights for this one, instead of the typical white trunks we had seen him wrestle in lately. Definitely fit the character a lot better. He also did a super savage promo after the break, first recapping the full video footage of the earlier brawl we saw between him and Wahoo. And in the full video, we see the closing seconds of the tape where Garvin gives Wahoo a brainbuster on the concrete floor, and if not outright killed him on the spot, at least gave him a concussion. But he also said he has another tape that he wanted to show next week. I guess unrelated to the video we just saw. Perhaps a porno. And then came the savage part of the promo where, well, point blank, he essentially called Baby Doll a slut. Said she was loose, out here every week with a different man because she's never satisfied. And then he kissed Precious, said he was the best wrestler in the world, and that they should leave before Baby Doll comes out and starts making out with all the people in the studio crowd. So what do we have on the show now? We have slut-shaming, fat-shaming, and derogatory misogynistic comments. Gotta love the 80s. Ivan and Nikita Koloff versus Jim Dawson and Bob Peters. I think I got that right. God, what a job guy name. Let's take two of the most generic white guy names in the English language and just pair them together. It's also made better by the fact that the guy looked like a Bob Peters. White, pudgy, and the receding hairline to go with it. And I think I determined after having watched this particular match, this must have been gives no fucks Nikita Koloff this week. When I tell you that Nikita massacred these job guys, that is no exaggeration. There is a point in this match where Nikita tags in and he picks up one of the job guys, And in an attempt to legitimately kill the man on live TV, he just threw him neck and back first into the ropes. Poor guy folded up like an accordion, thought he was dead. And then Makito just picked him back up and kept doing stuff. This also went through a commercial for God knows what reason, but it did. And they came back from break. Ivan immediately tagged in Makito, who killed one of the guys with a Russian sickle and pinned him. Great commercial spot. And then they did a promo, and I wrote absolutely nothing down about it. They wanted to apparently meet with Magnum later on the show to go over some final stipulations about the contract for the Nikita Magnum US Heavyweight title match. So this is where they had Tony Schiavone make the announcement for the location of the 1987 Crockett Cup. And out to join Tony for the announcement was Gary Juster, NWA promoter at the time. And the event was going to be hosted at the Baltimore Arena. They also didn't announce this at the time. Perhaps it wasn't set in stone by that point yet. But they did make the wise choice of making it a two-night event, whereas in 86, they tried to cram it all into one day, and it was just bad times all around. 87 was the year they established, better idea, let's make it a two-day event so that we're not burning out the fans in one sitting. And thinking back now, I have absolutely no memory of the 87 Crockett Cup. I remember who won in the finals, but if you asked me to recall a single match that took place on that show, I don't think I could do it on the spot. Okay, hold on, let me think. It wasn't Dusty and Nikita versus the Midnights, was it? Fuck, that's going to bother me now. Well, I guess we'll find out when we get there in April of 2023 when we recap it. I could have sworn that was the finals, though. But we'll find out. Rock and Roll Express wrestled Randy Mulkey and Gene Ligon. It goes approximately 15 seconds. I'm about 90% sure that there wasn't even an opening bell to this match. And they proceeded to royally fuck up their finishing double drop kick to Ligon. More accurately, Robert Gibson fucked up the double drop kick. Because Ricky Morton at least went up for the drop kick. Gibson, I don't know what he was doing in this match, but he was not mentally clocked in for this one. He had one job. This might have been the worst rock and roll squash we've seen yet. Normally, I don't have a thing or two to say about their matches because they usually go in there and just win with a double drop kick. And this time, they messed it up. Still one of the greatest tag teams of all time, though. It's amazing how great this business used to be. Then we had a Ric Flair promo who essentially just preached a dress for success promo. He also brought up Ricky Morton again, so I'll give you two guesses as to what phrase was mentioned here. And then he somehow got onto the topic of Hawk and the Road Warriors, promising that he was going to school them when he gets into the ring with them someday. Oh yeah, and he also had Tony give his wife Flair's best regards. Yeah, it was kind of a pointless promo. And then we had a promo from the James Boys, who are totally, absolutely, no question, not Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA in masks. In fact, we can confidently infer that based on the graphic of one of the individuals, that one of these James Boys is in fact Road Dogg. Anyway, they said some stuff. They're not even attempting to mask the fact that it's Magnum and Dusty. Like, you can even hear Dusty's lisp under the mask. It's so obvious. I did laugh at one point in this promo where Magnum's in the middle of cutting his dialogue, and there's a single audience member in the crowd that screams out, "Take off the masks, you hoodlums!" Whoever this man was, he made it known that he did not approve of the James Boys. I also believe Dusty had a line in here at the end where he was essentially promising that they were going to hang Corny by his neck while his tongue was hanging out. I'm yet to understand how these men were not arrested for pledging a homicide attempt on broadcast television. I guess it helps they were in masks, but yeah, I'm not really sure that one would fly in real life. Then we had Shaska Wadley and the Barbarian versus Mike Samani and Bill Mulkey. Barbarian won with the flying headbutt. That is all. Then we had Dusty Rhodes and Baby Doll out for a promo. Or as I wrote down in my notes here, Dusty Doll and Baby Rhodes. Kind of like that combo better, if I'm being honest. And had it not been for the crowd absolutely drowning out Dusty, I maybe would have been able to figure out a word or two of his deal. But the camera was also fixated on revealing Baby Doll's ups and downs, if you know what I'm saying. She did look very lovely in her blue dress. And Baby Doll also promised that she was going to physically humiliate Cornette because publicly embarrassing him wasn't enough. And she said it with just about as much emotion and passion as I did. And then we had the worst main event match of all time. Tony Zane versus Baron Von Raschke. They did a double Irish whip buckle spot in this match. I swear to God, I've seen elderly people on walkers move faster than these two did doing this spot. And, yeah, that's all I have to say about the match. It went about a minute, if that. Meanwhile, they still managed to get in a few rinky-dink looking spots in that one. And the show closed with Ivan Koloff and Magnum TA doing a confrontation at the booth, where Ivan informed Magnum that before he and Nikita meet for their U.S. title match, they're going to have a press conference. Because after months and months of the two doing back and forth promos and talking on these NWA studio shows to build up this match, they needed to hold off the match to do more talking. I almost chucked my computer out the window. And, well, then it concluded with Magnum doing a fiery babyface promo, which was really good in execution. But it was weird because the promo seemed to be directed at Ivan as a response. Meanwhile, Magnum is cutting the promo into the camera like Ivan was not physically there. So I don't know if this was edited in later on or what, but it was very strange. Like, the only other thing I could think was maybe he was talking to Nikita, who was also not out there during the final segment. But whatever. We are going to have a press conference with the Russians and Magnum before we get the big payoff. In modern terms, this is the WWE contract signing of 1986, where you can probably expect shenanigans and bullshittery to occur, but I guess we'll wait and see what happens. Overall, not a bad show. It was significantly shorter than normal. I think runtime for this week had it at a little under 60 minutes. And normally these shows run for about an hour and a half, so I guess they were shaving off time for this particular week. Show definitely flew by quicker, and certainly not a bad thing. And that'll take us right along to World Class for the week, which also felt like a shorter show than normal. Or maybe I'm just finding myself glossing over things more often. To be fair, aside from the main event, there wasn't a whole lot going on with this one. We had Mark Lorenz covering for Bill Mercer this week as he was in attendance for his daughter's graduation. Generally, I'd say he did fine on commentary. Yeah, I think it's something I think we always took for granted back in the day before the WWF model of commentating kind of took over as the be-all, end-all of how things should be presented to the public, but I always preferred the territorial approach to calling ring action, where it felt more like an actual sport-based form of announcing, and they weren't constantly screaming at the top of their lungs the entire show. Yeah, I understand it worked for the WWF because of the size of the audience, and they were constantly trying to present the product in a particular way, but God, it's so nice to be able to just hear announcers call ring action without blowing out my goddamn eardrums every 15 seconds. Opening match for the week was Toriyatu versus Paul Lashawn. Speaking of glossing over things. By the way, with Lorenz covering on play-by-play this week, the ring announcer for the week was someone who I had never heard of. I think Mark said his last name was Girardelli. He wasn't bad, although saying he was comfortable in his role probably wouldn't be all that accurate either. He did welcome people to the show by referring to the Dallas Sportatorium as, and I quote, the Big D. I laughed. So the match was not all that good. Took them about halfway into the opening bell for them to even lock up for the first time. And by the time they started actually doing stuff, I was kind of wishing they would have just gone back to the standoff. Yatsu won with an overhead power slam off the ropes. It's literally all I have to say about it. And we immediately followed that with a pre-taped interview with Arman Hussein and Yatsu at ringside. By the way, scrap everything I said about Hussein being written off of TV after that Kamala angle from a couple weeks back. Revisionist history, I guess. I had thought they had done the Kamala angle to write Hussein out of world class, but nope, turns out he was back here. Essentially letting us know that he and Yatsu are ready to go head-to-head with Kamala in a handicap match. Start digging the graves now. Then we had Chris Adams against the Mongol, a rivalry that has been brewing for quite a while on this show. And by that I mean all of maybe 2 weeks. It was a fun little match though. It was a lot better than I thought it would be, factoring in that it was a Mongol match. Adams worked over Mongol on the mat for a while in an armbar. A little bit of heat on Adams around the midway point. And that ended up leading to the big double collision spot where Adams got sent to the outside. Mongol tried to work him out on the floor, but Adams ended up firing back with a couple super kicks. Ended up breaking out the suicide dive here, which got a big reaction. Again, something that used to actually generate a response from the crowd in 1983 because you saw it maybe once every month instead of 6 times in every goddamn TV match you ever see. And that ended up leading to Mongol tying up Adams in the ropes, refusing to break the ref's 5 count, so he got himself DQ'd. Like I said, probably the best Mongol match you'll ever see. Which also goes to credit Chris Adams of being able to carry the guy to something watchable. Obviously, we will be seeing a lot more of Chris Adams in World Class over the next year or so. So, if these are the kinds of matches we can look forward to, thumbs up to that. And then we had gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus Johnny Mantell. Garvin also cutting another promo before the match like he did last week, challenging David Von Erich to a match anytime and any place. God, everything about Jimmy Garvin is just win. Win across the board. In a weird, almost kind of bizarre way. If you really weren't smart, or if you really were smart to the business, even by this point in the 80s, which not a lot of people were, but you could absolutely tell that Garvin had the it factor. It's one of those things, too, where you look through the timeline of wrestling history over the years, you fast forward to 87, and they were already toying with the idea of turning him babyface when he was such a great heel early in his career. I don't know, I mean, he pulled off the face run well, but God, his heel work was fantastic. It's like, he's one of those underrated heel personas that they don't get mentioned among the echelon of, top bad guys in the business, but, man, I'd encourage any young guy that's trying to break into the business today, guys like MJF, who's just really honing their craft right now as a heel, go watch Jimmy Garvin's work, man. Study what he did. Because he was a one-of-a-kind athlete. More than an athlete, a one-of-a-kind talent. He was just amazing. And, I mean, speaking of amazing, Sunshine's facials. God, she was great, too. She could do a complete 180 with her expressions in the snap of a finger. She was awesome. Like, 1 minute Garvin's getting the heat and working over Mantell on the mat in an armbar, and they pan the camera over to Sunshine where she's all smiles, super pearly and happy that her man is in complete control of the match. And like 10 seconds later, Mantell hits an arm drag takeover on Garvin, and now Sunshine's on edge. Garvin won with the atomic back-breaking knee drop, as directly quoted from Mark Lorenz on commentary. It was literally just a backbreaker across the knee after Garvin caught Mantell in a fallaway slam position. But no, goddamn it all, we're putting this move over like it's the most devastating offensive maneuver in the book. It is not just a simple backbreaker. It is an atomic backbreaking knee drop. Would have been better if it was called the Super Ultra Atomic Mega Backbreaking Drop of Doom across the knee. And our main event was Terry Gordy versus Kevin Von Erich, I believe for the American Heavyweight Championship. And, it's Freebirds versus Von Erichs. There's really not a whole lot to say about these matches that hasn't already been stated 100 times already in these world-class recaps we've been doing. These two in particular had really good chemistry together. You know, all their transitions were smooth and seamless. They executed everything perfectly. You know, one thing I wrote down here toward the end of the match in my notes, I just caught it out of the corner of my eye as I was skimming down here, but it was very apparent that they were calling spots whenever they were laying on the mat in a hold. And, you know, it wasn't something like arm drag, tackle, hip toss, or something basic. It was like, here's what we're doing to get from point A to point B to point C, and so on and so forth. But, hey, I guess that's part of the problem with being smart to the business. You start to pick up on the subtle things, like when you notice guys are calling spots. And, you know, when you're a kid, you just never pick up on these kinds of things. But, you know, at least these guys made an attempt to hide it instead of fucking assholes like John Cena who would just scream spots whenever they were running ropes or something like that. But this was really great. Gordy's selling facials. My God, those are some of the best facials I've ever seen. Like, that dude knew how to make you believe he was in vulnerable situations. You know, even something as simple as Kevin putting him in a rear naked choke, and Gordy's on the mat, quivering his lips and gasping for air, his face is turning beet red. God, he was amazing. And they had a great finishing sequence here where Gordy's trying to go for the pile driver on a couple occasions, but Kevin fought out of it. Gordy tried to go up top for a diving crossbody, but Kevin moved. And then Kevin immediately hit the crossbody dive off the top rope onto Gordy and pinned him. Shades of exactly how he pinned Flair in the NWA World Title match a few weeks back. Except this time, there was no fucked finish. Because there was no doubt that Kevin won this match. And he had a great little post-match interview where he said, tonight, it's the American Heavyweight title. And next time when he and Flair meet, it's the world title that he's taking home with him. You know, I said there wasn't a whole lot going on with this show, but the fuck was I thinking? This is a great episode. You know, Mongol and Adams was 1,000 times better than it had any right to be. Garvin's match was the usual great Garvin match, and Gordy-Kevin was a phenomenal main event title match. And once you get past the fact that it's another combo of the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, you can just enjoy it for what it is. Based on the closing moments of the show, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot going on for next week, though. They hyped up a 6-man tag, but beyond that, I think they just plugged that they were going to be showing the full replay of the Ric Flair-Kevin Von Erich title match, which should be fun to go back and watch a second time, although I'm not really sure if I'll have anything new to report on that I already didn't cover the first go-around, but we'll see. Anyhow, that was an interesting little show we put together this week. The retro material continues to be the best stuff we cover. It's sure as hell the most fun I have talking about wrestling on this podcast, and I hope you all dig it too. And of course, as always, you can show your support by clicking that like button, subscribe to the channel so you can stay posted when our shows go up each Monday and Friday. Just make sure that bell notification is turned on. And also be sure to leave a comment to share your insight on anything we discussed today. Love to hear you comment and share your thoughts on the topics at hand. If you're following along in the retro review series or you're finding some of the old content, let me know what you think about NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class around this point. Were you a fan? Were you not a fan? Were you even watching around that point? Or is this all kind of new material for you? So, we'll be back on Monday for the NWA Power and AEW Rampage report. And that'll pretty much wrap it up for this one. Thanks for stopping in. Take care, all. Peace out.